It was supposed to be a weekend of fun and relaxation. Jake, Melissa, Ryan, and Hannah were all friends since college, and they had been planning a camping trip for months. They chose a remote spot deep in Blackwood Forest, far away from the noise and stress of city life. Blackwood was known for its dense trees and eerie silence, but it also promised tranquility and a break from their hectic schedules. Jake, always the organizer, had booked the campsite and gathered all the necessary gear. On a crisp Friday afternoon, they packed their car and set off, excited about the adventure ahead. The drive was long, and as they ventured deeper into the forest, the roads became narrow and winding. Tall trees loomed on either side, their branches forming a canopy that blocked out most of the sunlight. By the time they arrived at their campsite, the sun was already dipping below the horizon, casting long shadows across the forest floor. The group quickly set up their tents and built a fire. As the flames crackled and danced, they shared stories, laughed, and enjoyed the peacefulness of their surroundings. "Have you heard the legends about this place?" Ryan asked, his voice hushed and dramatic. "Legends?" Melissa replied, rolling her eyes. "Here we go. What scary stories have you dug up this time?" Ryan grinned. "Supposedly this forest is haunted. They say people have gone missing here, never to be seen again. Some claim to hear whispers in the wind, calling them deeper into the woods." Hannah shivered and pulled her jacket tighter around her. "That's just local folklore. Every old forest has its ghost stories." "Still," Jake said, poking at the fire with a stick, "it's creepy to think about." They eventually retired to their tents, the fire burning low, casting an orange glow around the campsite. The forest was unnaturally quiet, with no sounds of wildlife. Exhausted from the trip, they fell into a deep sleep. Jake awoke in the middle of the night, a sense of unease settling over him. He listened carefully but heard nothing out of the ordinary. The forest was silent, almost oppressively so. He shook his head, chalking it up to Ryan's ghost stories, and tried to go back to sleep. A soft, rustling noise jolted him awake again. This time, it was unmistakable. Someone or something was moving outside the tent. He lay still, his heart pounding in his chest, straining to hear. The rustling grew louder, then stopped suddenly, replaced by a faint whispering. Jake sat up, trying to peer through the darkness. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice trembling slightly. There was no answer, just the rustling of leaves and that eerie whispering, barely audible. He grabbed a flashlight and unzipped the tent, stepping out into the cool night air. He shone the light around but saw nothing unusual. Everything was still. He was about to turn back when he noticed something strange. The ground near the edge of the campsite looked disturbed, as if someone had been digging. A chill ran down his spine, but he forced himself to investigate. As he approached, he realized it wasn't just disturbed, it was a shallow grave, freshly dug. Jake's heart raced as he stumbled back to the tent, waking the others. "Guys, wake up! You need to see this!" Groggy and confused, they followed him outside. When they saw the grave, their expressions turned from annoyance to fear. "Who would do this?" Melissa whispered, her eyes wide with terror. Ryan shook his head. "Maybe it's just a prank. Some locals trying to scare us." "But who would know we're here?" Hannah asked, her voice quivering. "We didn't tell anyone where we were going." The group decided to stay close together, huddling by the dying fire. No one could sleep after that. They kept watch, their ears straining for any sound. But the rest of the night passed without incident. Morning brought little comfort. The grave was still there, a stark reminder of the night's terror. Jake decided they should pack up and leave, but the others insisted on staying, thinking it was just a one-off prank. "Let's just enjoy the day," Ryan said, trying to lift their spirits. "We'll stay close to the campsite and keep an eye out." Reluctantly, Jake agreed. They spent the day exploring the nearby trails, but the sense of unease never left them. Every rustling leaf and snapping twig put them on edge. As the sun began to set, they returned to the campsite. To their horror, they found their tents slashed open and their supplies strewn about. Panic set in as they realized they weren't alone in the forest. "We need to leave now," Jake said firmly. "This isn't safe." Before they could pack up, a figure emerged from the trees. It was an old man, his clothes ragged and his eyes wild. He stared at them for a moment before speaking in a raspy voice. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "This forest is cursed." "Who are you?" Melissa asked, trying to keep her voice steady. The old man shook his head. "It doesn't matter. What matters is you need to leave. Now." "Why? What's happening here?" Ryan demanded. The old man glanced around nervously. "The forest. It takes people. It feeds on fear. The more scared you are, the stronger it gets. If you stay, it will consume you." "He's crazy," Hannah whispered to Jake. "We should just go." Jake nodded, but before they could move, the old man turned and disappeared into the forest, leaving them with more questions than answers. Fear gripped them as they hurriedly packed their remaining belongings. The sense of being watched grew stronger, and the whispering in the wind became more distinct. As they made their way back to the car, the forest seemed to close in around them. Shadows flickered at the edge of their vision, and strange noises echoed through the trees. The path they had taken earlier now seemed unfamiliar, twisting and turning in ways they didn't remember. "We're lost," Melissa said, panic rising in her voice. "How can we be lost?" "Just keep moving," Jake urged. "We have to find the road." Hours passed and the forest grew darker. Their flashlights flickered, the batteries dying. The whispering grew louder, more insistent. It felt as if the forest itself was alive, playing with their minds. Finally, they stumbled onto the road, but their relief was short-lived. The car was nowhere in sight. They must have taken a wrong turn. Exhausted and terrified, they collapsed by the roadside, trying to catch their breath. "What do we do now?" Hannah asked, her voice trembling. "We keep walking," Jake said. "We have to find help." They followed the road, the whispering ever present, gnawing at their sanity. Just when they thought they couldn't go any further, they saw headlights in the distance. A car was approaching. They waved frantically and the car stopped. The driver, a middle-aged woman, rolled down her window. "Are you all okay?" "We need help," Jake said. "We've been lost in the forest." The woman nodded. "Get in. I'll take you to the nearest town." As they drove away from the forest, the whispering faded, but the sense of dread remained. They were safe, but they knew they would never forget the horrors they had encountered. Back in town, they recounted their ordeal to the local authorities. The police were skeptical but agreed to investigate. The old man they had seen was never found, and the campsite showed no signs of the disturbances they had described. Jake, Melissa, Ryan, and Hannah tried to move on with their lives, but the memories of that night haunted them. They couldn't shake the feeling that the forest was still watching, waiting for its next victims. Years later, they reunited, each of them bearing the scars of their experience. They shared their stories, trying to make sense of what had happened. In the end, they realized that some mysteries are best left unsolved. As they parted ways once more, they made a silent pact, never to speak of Blackwood Forest again. It was a place of darkness and fear, a place where the line between reality and nightmare blurred. And though they had escaped, they knew the forest would always be with them, a silent echo in the back of their minds, whispering of the horrors that lurked in the shadows. Sam had always been the daredevil of the group. He loved the thrill of the unknown and constantly sought new adventures. So when he suggested a spontaneous camping trip to Blackwood Forest, his friends hesitated but ultimately agreed. They were all seasoned campers, but Blackwood Forest had a reputation. It was rumored to be haunted. Joining Sam were his girlfriend Lily, his best friend Mike, and Mike's sister Anna. They packed up their gear, eager for a weekend away from their bustling city lives. The drive to Blackwood was filled with laughter and music, but as they approached the forest, an eerie silence fell over them. The trees were dense, their branches almost forming a barrier that seemed to warn them away. They found a clearing and set up camp, deciding to explore a bit before nightfall. As they ventured deeper into the forest, Sam, ever the prankster, started telling ghost stories, much to the chagrin of Lily and Anna. "You know, they say people hear voices in this forest," Sam said with a grin. "Voices that call out your name, trying to lure you deeper." "Knock it off, Sam," Lily snapped. "It's creepy enough without your stories." Mike laughed, but there was a nervous edge to it. "Let's just get the fire going and enjoy the night." As the sun set, they gathered around the campfire, roasting marshmallows and sharing stories. The forest was unnaturally quiet, and every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves made them jump. Around midnight, the fire began to die down, and they decided to call it a night. Sam and Lily retired to their tent, while Mike and Anna shared another. The silence of the forest was deafening, and it wasn't long before they fell asleep. Sam woke up to a soft whisper. At first, he thought it was Lily, but when he turned to her, she was fast asleep. The whispering continued, more insistent now. He strained to listen, but the words were indistinguishable. "Lily, wake up," he whispered, shaking her gently. Lily groaned. "What is it?" "Do you hear that?" he asked. She listened for a moment and then shook her head. "It's probably just the wind. Go back to sleep." Sam lay back down, but the whispering persisted. It seemed to be coming from all around them, circling the tent. He tried to ignore it, but sleep wouldn't come. In the other tent, Anna had a similar experience. She nudged Mike awake. "Do you hear that whispering?" Mike listened, his face growing pale. "Yeah, I do. What the hell is that?" They both lay there, hearts pounding, as the whispers grew louder, then suddenly stopped. The silence that followed was even more unnerving. Morning came, bringing a sense of relief. The forest seemed almost peaceful in the daylight. They shrugged off the night's events as their imagination playing tricks on them. They spent the day hiking and exploring, but there was a tension among them that they couldn't shake. As night fell, they gathered around the campfire once more, trying to keep their spirits up. "We need to stick together tonight," Mike said. "No one goes anywhere alone." Everyone agreed, but the unease lingered. They retired to their tents early, hoping for a peaceful night's sleep. In the middle of the night, Lily woke up to find Sam missing. His sleeping bag was empty, and there was no sign of him. Panic set in as she scrambled out of the tent and woke the others. "Sam's gone," she cried. "I can't find him anywhere." Mike and Anna jumped up, grabbing flashlights. They called out for Sam, their voices echoing through the forest, but there was no response. As they searched the campsite, they found something that made their blood run cold. A trail of footprints leading away from the camp, deeper into the forest. "We have to find him," Mike said, his voice trembling. They followed the footprints, their flashlights casting eerie shadows on the trees. The whispering started again, faint at first, but growing louder as they went deeper. "Sam!" Lily called out, her voice breaking. "Where are you?" Suddenly, they heard a distant scream. It was Sam's voice, filled with terror. They ran towards the sound, their hearts pounding in their chests. The trail led them to a small clearing. In the center was an old, dilapidated cabin that looked like it had been abandoned for years. The door creaked open, and they cautiously stepped inside. The cabin was dark and cold, with a thick layer of dust covering everything. In the corner, they found Sam. He was curled up in a ball, his eyes wide with fear. "Sam!" Lily cried, rushing to his side. "What happened?" Sam looked up at her, his face pale. "The voices. They led me here. I couldn't stop. They kept calling my name." Mike and Anna exchanged worried glances. "We need to get out of here," Mike said. "Now!" They helped Sam to his feet and hurried back to the campsite. The whispering followed them, growing louder and more urgent. When they reached the camp, they quickly packed up their gear, desperate to leave. As they made their way back to the car, the forest seemed to come alive. Shadows darted between the trees, and the whispering was almost deafening. It felt as if the forest itself was trying to keep them from leaving. Finally, they reached the car and piled in, speeding away from Blackwood Forest. The whispering faded, but the fear remained. Back in the safety of their homes, they tried to make sense of what had happened. Sam was haunted by nightmares, and the others couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching them. They did some research and discovered that Blackwood Forest had a dark history. There had been numerous disappearances over the years, and the locals believed the forest was cursed. According to legend, the spirits of those who had vanished were trapped in the forest, luring others to their doom. Determined to find answers, they returned to Blackwood Forest with a local historian. The historian explained that the cabin they had found was once home to a reclusive hermit who practiced dark rituals. It was said that he had summoned malevolent spirits to protect the forest, and those spirits were responsible for the whispering voices. The group decided to perform a cleansing ritual, hoping to put the spirits to rest. They gathered around the cabin, chanting prayers and burning sage. As the smoke filled the air, the whispering grew louder, then abruptly stopped. The forest fell silent, and a sense of peace settled over them. They left Blackwood Forest for the final time, hoping they had done enough to break the curse. The nightmares ceased, and the sense of being watched faded. Though they would never forget their terrifying experience, they found solace in the belief that they had freed the trapped spirits. Years later, they returned to the site, now overgrown and reclaimed by nature. The cabin was gone, swallowed by the forest, but the sense of dread had lifted. They stood in the clearing, grateful for their survival and the bond they had forged through their ordeal. The forest had been silent for years, no longer haunted by whispers. They had faced their fears and emerged stronger, knowing that sometimes The greatest strength lies in confronting the darkness and finding the light within. Jake, Melissa, Ryan, and Hannah were excited for their weekend camping trip in Blackwood Forest. Known for its dense trees and eerie silence, the forest was a perfect escape from their busy lives. They packed their gear and drove to the remote campsite, arriving just as the sun set behind the towering pines. "Are we really doing this?" Hannah asked, her voice tinged with both excitement and trepidation. "Absolutely," Jake said, setting up the tent. "A weekend away from everything. Just what we need." As night fell, they built a fire and settled in, sharing stories and laughter. Ryan, always the joker, started telling ghost stories. "They say this forest is haunted," Ryan began, his voice low and dramatic. "People have gone missing here, lured by mysterious whispers." "Cut it out, Ryan," Melissa said, rolling her eyes. "Let's just enjoy the night." But as they went to bed, a sense of unease lingered in the air. Jake woke up in the middle of the night to a faint whispering. At first he thought it was the wind, but the whispers grew louder, forming indistinct words. He nudged Melissa awake. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. Melissa listened, her eyes widening. "What is that?" The whisperings seemed to come from all around them, an eerie, disembodied sound. They stepped out of the tent, shining their flashlights into the darkness. The forest was unnaturally silent, except for the whispers. "Ryan? Hannah?" Jake called, trying to steady his voice. Ryan and Hannah emerged from their tent, equally alarmed. "What's going on?" Ryan asked. "Do you hear the whispers?" Melissa asked. They all nodded, their faces pale in the dim light. The whispers continued, growing louder and more insistent. "We should stick together," Jake said. "Let's stay by the fire." They huddled around the fire, the whispering relentless. None of them could sleep, and as dawn approached, the whispers finally ceased, leaving an unsettling silence in their wake. The next day, they tried to shake off the previous night's experience, convincing themselves it was just their imagination. They spent the day exploring the forest, but the tension remained. As night fell again, they gathered by the fire, wary of what the darkness might bring. This time, the whispering started even earlier, an ominous prelude to something more sinister. "I'm going to bed early," Hannah said, her voice shaky. "I can't deal with this." They all decided to turn in, hoping sleep would come. But in the middle of the night, Ryan woke up to find Hannah missing. Her sleeping bag was empty, and there was no sign of her anywhere. "Jake! Melissa! Hannah's gone!" Ryan yelled, panic rising in his voice. They all scrambled out of their tents, calling Hannah's name. The whispering was louder than ever, almost deafening. "We need to find her," Jake said, grabbing his flashlight. "She can't have gone far." They followed what seemed to be a trail, the whispering guiding them deeper into the forest. It led them to a small clearing where they found Hannah, standing in a trance-like state, her eyes wide and unseeing. "Hannah!" Melissa cried, rushing to her side. "What happened?" Hannah blinked, as if waking from a dream. I don't know. The whispers, they called me." "We need to get out of here," Jake said urgently. "Now." They hurried back to their campsite, packed their gear, and started making their way to the car. The forest seemed alive with whispers, shadows flitting between the trees. "Keep moving," Jake urged, fear evident in his voice. They finally reached the car and sped away from Blackwood Forest, the whispering fading into the distance. Relief washed over them as they left the forest behind, but the experience had left them shaken. Back in town, they shared their story with the locals, who listened with knowing eyes. Blackwood Forest has always been like that, an old man said. Best to stay away. Jake, Melissa, Ryan, and Hannah vowed never to return to Blackwood Forest. The whispers had followed them out, haunting their dreams, a reminder of the eerie silence and the darkness that lurked within the trees. They knew they had been lucky to escape, but the echoes of that night would stay with them forever, a chilling reminder of the unknown horrors that reside in the depths of Blackwood Forest.